Todd McFarlane's one of the most polarizing figures in comics. Some people love him, some people hate him, but either way, you can't deny his talent and entrepreneurial strategies. He's an amazing artist, and the guy knows how to make a buck. In the 80s, McFarlane worked for both DC and Marvel, on everything from Batman to the Incredible Hulk. In 1988, he began to work on The Amazing Spider-Man as the cover artist and the penciler. This issue would begin a story arc that would culminate in issue 300 with the first appearance of Venom, a character that's become one of Marvel's most popular villains. Amazing Spider-Man 300 was a hugely sought-after book and cemented McFarlane's demand as an artist. Over the years of drawing Spider-Man, McFarlane developed a huge fan base. He became tired of the creative void he was stuck in at Marvel, and in the early 90s decided to move on and start his own comic book company. He met with other illustrators who worked in the industry who were tired of the policies and restrictions they had to work under. McFarlane, along with Jim Lee, Mark Straczynski, Rob Liefeld, Erik Larsen, Whilce Portacio, and Jim Valentino all joined together to form Image Comics. Each of the creators formed their own studio within Image, and in 1992 they launched their flagship titles. Erik Larsen's The Savage Dragon, Rob Liefeld's Youngblood, Jim Lee's Wildcats, and Todd McFarlane's Spawn. While the comics all sold well, Spawn quickly became the standout book from the company, with its first issue selling 1.7 million copies. The look of Spawn was heavily influenced by some of the books McFarlane previously worked on. Batman's cape, Spider-Man's webs, and the Spawn suit was a symbiotic entity, like Venom. McFarlane was enjoying the creative control as both writer and artist, and began to use the popularity of the character to build a media empire. His process was to set 4 pillars with which to build his house, while using the comic as the foundation. He began to work on Todd McFarlane's Spawn, an animated series for HBO. It ran for 3 seasons and won an Emmy in 1999 for Outstanding Animated Program. He worked with different video game companies who licensed the character, and as of currently, he's had 5 video games based on Spawn, and he was a playable character in Soul Calibur 2. He started his own line of toys that originally was just characters from Spawn, but eventually went on to include licensed characters from horror movies, to other things like The Beatles and The Simpsons. His last pillar was to create a film franchise based on the character, and this began the long journey towards bringing Spawn to the big screen. McFarlane shopped the property around and eventually went with New Line Cinema since they agreed to allow him to have creative control, as well as the merchandising rights. When first asked what McFarlane would do if he was given full control of the movie and could make whatever he wanted, he said he'd take the money and make a hard R animated adaptation. Even though Spawn was a hot property, in 1993, comic book movies weren't being taken seriously, despite the massive success of comic book movies like Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The studio gave the movie a $20 million budget and insisted it be rated PG-13. In a baffling decision, McFarlane agreed that the movie should be PG-13. They knew the film would be effects-heavy, so they brought in ex-Industrial Light and Magic artists Mark Dupe, Clint Goldman, and Steve Spaz Williams. The team had worked at ILM on major productions like The Abyss and Terminator 2, so their talents would mesh well with Spawn. Dupe was set to direct, while the others handled the effects supervision and second unit work. The character of Spawn was an anti-hero. He wasn't the first, but definitely the one whose popularity influenced a wave of dark comic book characters in the 90s and beyond. In the comics, Spawn was originally Al Simmons, an assassin for the CIA. He's double-crossed by Jason Wynn, the director of the CIA, who hired an agent named Chapel to kill him. Simmons goes to hell where he meets Malebolgia, the devil, and sells his soul in exchange to be able to see his wife one more time. The devil, of course, didn't tell him that he'd be sent back to Earth 5 years later as a Hellspawn. The movie changed a few things, some to condense the story, since they only had 90 minutes, and other things for various reasons. Simmons was still double-crossed by Wynn and sent to hell, but in the movie he's killed by Jessica Priest, a character that didn't exist in the comic at the time. They created Priest for the movie because Chapel, who killed Simmons in the book, was a creation of Rob Liefeld, and he wouldn't give the rights over for his use in the movie. McFarlane later worked Priest into the comics. Spawn's a black hero, and in the comics, his best friend is Terry Fitzgerald, who's also black. In the movie, they cast the awesome up-and-coming Michael Jai White to play Simmons, but cast D.B. Sweeney to play Fitzgerald. They were already getting some grief because this was the first movie with a black main hero, and it's rumored they were only able to get the okay if they had Fitzgerald played by a white guy. In both the comic and the movie, Cagliostro is a former Hellspawn that's on Earth trying to help guide Spawn to learn how to use his powers to fight back against Malebolgia. While Malebolgia is the big bad guy, the Violator is the major villain in the movie. Like the comics, Violator had 2 forms, the Clown and the Demon. The Clown's his primary form, used to interact with newly born Hellspawn on Earth. Clown's a short, obnoxiously perverse being, played perfectly by John Leguizamo. Rounding out the rest of the cast was Teresa Randall as Spawn's wife Wanda, Martin Sheen as Jason Wynn, Nico Williamson as Cagliostro, Melinda Clarke as Priest, and Frank Welker as the voice of Malebolgia. Welker's an amazing voice actor, and this really isn't his fault, but Malebolgia sounded less like the devil and more like Dr. Claw.
Spawn must choose to murder Wynn and release the virus.
The visual effects team worked hard to make the characters match the comics as closely as possible. Leguizamo spent 2.5 hours in makeup and had to wear a fat suit for the Clown. Also, since Clown's only 4 feet tall, he had to squat down for every scene. While some of Spawn's shots were digital, for the bulk of it, Jai White spent hours every day getting into a Spawn suit. The Spawn CGI model was the most elaborate human model built at the time. Originally, Hell was not in the movie. They just had a dark room that was supposed to be a stand-in for Hell. As they got closer to filming, they realized that the room wasn't going to work, so they devised a way to get the budget to create those new scenes. The movie originally had a 70-day shoot schedule, but the team dropped it to 63, which freed up $1 million so they could have the budget to create Hell. Malebolgia was going to be a puppet, but they opted to make him CGI. The reason why his mouth wasn't moving was that they were trying to imply that he was speaking through Hell. It didn't quite work. After signing on to play Wynn, Sheen was having dinner with his grandson, who was overjoyed to find out that he was going to be in a Spawn movie. Priest was killed early in the movie, and they originally scripted it that she was going to be brought back cybernetically for a battle later in the film. However, they had to drop it because it was too expensive. As filming progressed, the studio became more and more excited with what they were doing, so they raised the budget from $20 million to $40. This enabled them to increase the visual effects shots from 75 to over 400. One of the new shots was an audience favorite. It's of Spawn on a rooftop with his cape flowing in the wind. That looked straight out of the comics. In the comics, Spawn usually has his cape out. Since in the movie his cape's fully digital, they only used it for certain key scenes. McFarlane wanted to have plenty of cameo moments in the film for the fans. The girl in the green dress at the party was Angela, an angel who hunts Hellspawn. The newscasters were right out of the comics. Wanda's air freshener looks like the Clown. Violator's one of the 5 Flabiac brothers. He references them in the movie, but intentionally calls one of them a vibrator.
I'm not the Vindicator, or the Victimizer, or the Vaporizer, or the Vibrator.
The transitions were done to emulate the comics. Towards the end, the officers arresting Wynn were Sam and Twitch, the cops chasing after Spawn in the comics. McFarlane himself played one of the bums, who almost gets killed by his own creation. The Clown's transformation to his Violator form took 8 months to do, from storyboarding to modeling, and all the way to the final render. The Violator was done similarly to the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park. He was sometimes a giant animatronic model, and other times was CGI. When Simmons was set on fire, it was actually Michael Jai White, not a stunt double. The motorcycle covered in Spawn's cape was a practical effect that they enhanced with CGI to give it that pulsating glow, so somebody had to actually drive this thing. When Spawn's being chased by the truck, an accident happened, which caused the fence to swing out and hit the stuntman for real. This was not planned. Thankfully, he was a pro and only suffered minor injuries by crashing the bike. They had 2 major sets, the roof and the alley. The cathedral exterior was CGI, with the lead animator wearing the Spawn suit. The A6 exterior was the Greater Los Angeles prison. The Legions of Hell were one guy in the Spawn costume on a green screen. They had him do hundreds of different movements, and they just duplicated him all over the place. While the demon form of the Violator is not nearly as creepy as it is in the comics, Leguizamo's look and performance as the Clown is perfect. His combination of references, mixed with dick and fart jokes, is exactly the way the Clown was in the comic. Some of his dialogue was even partially lifted from the comics.
I'm gonna cut you into 50 pieces and mail you to every state.
The maggots on the pizza were really waxworms. Moth larvae much larger than maggots. And yes, Leguizamo ate them and promptly threw up. They had to shoot the scene twice. After filming and all the visual effects work was done, the real challenge began. They submitted the film for rating, and it came back with an R. They made some changes, and it still came back with an R. The ratings board had strange requests in order for it to get a PG-13 rating. It was understandable that there was no nudity or extreme violence, but since we had to see Simmons get killed, they wouldn't allow for anyone else in the movie to be seen getting shot. So none of the guards are seen getting shot, and Priest takes a fall instead of getting shot in the head. They were also not allowed to reference hell. A large portion of Clown's vulgarities had to be removed. Everything from his racing striped underwear to his sex joke with a donut.
What does it remind you of, huh?
They removed Simmons snapping a guy's neck, and the list goes on and on. It seemed like the ratings board had it out for the film, since they didn't like the evil angle. They weren't allowed to show long scenes in the cemetery, they couldn't show Spawn being crucified, and other nonsense. Finally, after 5 submissions and 220 changes, they got their PG-13 rating. I'll never understand their insistence to go PG-13 with this one. The comics were a hard R, the animation was a hard R, so why go soft on the theatrical film? Plus, this was back in the 90s when R wasn't a complete stigma. Face Off, Scream 2, Con Air, and Conspiracy Theory were all rated R, and all of them made well over $100 million. Spawn at $40 million was a pretty low risk, and it would have definitely made its money back. The movie opened against the R-rated Air Force One and came in second place with $19 million. It was being pushed as the special effects movie of the year, and while some of it doesn't look that great now, back then was a big deal. Many of the visuals were things that were never seen before, and it was pretty exciting. The movie would go on to gross $87 million worldwide, which is not exactly what they were hoping for. So McFarlane's fourth pillar never took hold. When the movie was released on DVD, they restored it to his original cut, which is still incredibly tame when compared to the book. I like the movie, but I admit it's heavily flawed. The visuals haven't aged well, and when compared to current comic book movies, it feels extremely dialed back. Watch this, and then the HBO series, to see just how much they had to hold back. The PG-13 rating watered it down so much, the Violator doesn't even kill anyone in the movie. In the comic, his introduction is heralded by him ripping out the hearts of a bunch of mafia guys. The R-rated version isn't too much better, with him inadvertently killing a bum. Still, like it or not, it was a landmark film. It was the first superhero film with a black lead. It was Image Comics' first movie, and it helped to pave the way for a wider variety of comic book movies. In early 2015, McFarlane announced a new Spawn movie was in the works. It's not that I don't believe him, but he's been saying this since 2001. While I'm growing tired of remakes and reboots, Spawn is one that definitely needs a reboot. If the Spawn reboot ever happens, they need to go R. If they don't, they're stupid. Some things can be dialed back, but an assassin that's back from hell fighting off demons that are eviscerating people and trying to stop a child-murdering pedophile that's next in line to become an officer in Hell's Army doesn't exactly strike me as something that should be made for kids.
So you go, why am I here, God? Bazooka fight. Why am I here, God? Dinosaurs. Why am I here? Alien invasion.